I didn't raise my voice. Not once. When I found out what my son-in-law had done, what they had both done, I just sat there in my kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, and I smiled. My daughter thought that smile meant I was losing it. She was wrong. Let me back up. My name is Bernarded. Wait, no. I need to start from the real beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. I spent 31 years building a plumbing supply business in Roanoke, Virginia. Not glamorous. Nobody writes songs about PVC fittings and copper pipe, but I built it from nothing. A second-hand truck, a storage unit, and a phone that rang maybe twice a day. By the time I was 55, Whitfield Supply had contracts with 3 regional construction companies and a distribution deal with a national hardware chain. I had 12 employees, a warehouse, a modest office on Industrial Boulevard that I was embarrassingly proud of. I also had a secret. Not the kind you're thinking. It was simpler than that, and more important. I never told my daughter how much any of it was worth. She grew up watching me work. She saw the truck, the warehouse, the handshakes, and the long hours. She saw me drive a 10-year-old pickup and pack my own lunch every day. She thought the business was fine, comfortable. She had no idea it was worth just under $4 million, plus a commercial property on the edge of town I'd bought quietly during the 2008 crash and held ever since. I didn't hide it to be cruel. I hid it because I'd watched what money does to people when they know it's coming. I had seen it with my own brother, back when our father passed. I didn't want that for my daughter. I wanted her to build her own life, make her own choices, love who she loved without any shadow of inheritance sitting over it. So when she brought home a man named Clifford— no, wait, I need to use a name I haven't used before. Let me call him what he was. First, he was the kind of man who shook your hand while already looking past your shoulder. He had perfect teeth and a firm grip, and he spoke in the cadence of someone who had practiced being charming. My daughter Noella. No, I've used that. My daughter, whose name I'll call Petra. No. Her name was Wren. My daughter's name was Wren. And the man she married, I'll call him Sutton. Wren was 32 when she married Sutton. I walked her down the aisle at a venue outside Charlottesville that cost more than my first truck. Sutton's family paid for half of it. They were from money, old Virginia tobacco money that had mostly evaporated by the time Sutton got to it, though nobody said that out loud. He worked in commercial real estate. He wore sport coats on weekdays and talked about portfolio diversification at dinner like it was something he'd recently discovered and needed to share with the table. I liked him fine, at first. It was about 2 years into their marriage when I had my first heart episode. Nothing dramatic, a warning, my cardiologist called it. Atrial fibrillation, some arterial narrowing, the beginning of a conversation I didn't want to have. I was 58 years old, and suddenly I was sitting in a hospital room in a gown that didn't quite close in the back, listening to a doctor tell me I needed to slow down. Wren was there within an hour. She cried in the hallway. She held my hand. She is a good daughter. I want to make that clear, because what happened later is complicated, and I don't want you to think otherwise. Sutton arrived 40 minutes after Wren. He sat in the chair by the window and asked the right questions and said the right things, but there was something behind his eyes that I couldn't name then. I can name it now. It was calculation. About a week after I came home from the hospital, Sutton came by alone. Wren was at work. She's a physical therapist. Works long days. He brought me a casserole from a place downtown and sat at my kitchen table and said very gently that he'd been thinking about my situation. Your situation, I said. Your health, he said. And the business. Wren worries about you trying to manage everything alone. I told him I had a general manager, a bookkeeper, and a lawyer on retainer. I was fine. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they've already decided what they think. Then he said, and I remember this exactly, you know, it might give Wren real peace of mind if we had a little more visibility into the finances, just so we're not blindsided if something happens. I said I appreciated his concern. He left the casserole. I threw it away, not because of anything I could prove, just a feeling. Over the next several months, the conversation shifted. Slowly, the way water cuts rock. Wren started mentioning that Sutton had looked into estate planning on my behalf, that he'd talked to someone about the best way to structure things, that it might make sense to add him to some of the business accounts, just as a precaution, so that if I was ever incapacitated, there wouldn't be any disruption. I listened. I nodded. I said I'd think about it. What I didn't tell them was that I had already talked to my lawyer, a woman named Patricia who had handled my business affairs for 15 years and who I trusted absolutely. And she'd said the same thing I was thinking. Be careful. Take your time. Don't sign anything in a hurry. The health scare settled into routine. I took my medications. I cut my hours at the warehouse. I handed more day-to-day responsibility to my general manager and started coming in 3 days a week instead of 5. I felt fine, mostly. A little tired, a little more aware of my own heartbeat than I used to be. Sutton, meanwhile, had started making moves I didn't fully understand until later. He began talking to people in my professional circle. He showed up at a Chamber of Commerce event where my business was a member, introduced himself as family, shook hands. He had lunch with a commercial real estate broker I knew. He asked my bookkeeper, a young guy named Trent, who'd been with me for 3 years, a series of questions about receivables and outstanding contracts, framing it as family trying to stay informed. Trent told me about it to his credit. I thanked him, gave him a raise, and told him to share nothing further. Then came the day I found out about the warehouse. I was home on a Tuesday, doctor's appointment in the morning, nothing serious, when my phone rang. It was the broker Sutton had lunched with. A man I'll call Reeves. He called because he was confused. He had received a letter of intent, apparently, to negotiate the sale of my warehouse property on Industrial Boulevard. The letter referenced a family representative with authorization to act on my behalf. I asked him to read me the name on the letter. He read it. It was Sutton's name. I sat very still for a moment, the way you go still when something slots into place that you didn't want to understand. Did you proceed? I asked. No, Reeves said. I wanted to call you first. Something felt off. I thanked him. I hung up. I made 2 more phone calls, one to Patricia, one to my bank. Then I sat in my kitchen with that cold cup of coffee and I smiled. Not because it was funny, because I finally knew exactly what I was dealing with, and I already knew exactly what I was going to do about it. Here's what Sutton didn't know. He didn't know about the property trust Patricia had helped me structure 4 years earlier, after my wife passed. The warehouse wasn't held in my personal name. It was held in a trust, and the only person with authority to direct that trust was me. Any letter of intent Sutton produced was meaningless. He couldn't sell what he had no legal access to. He also didn't know about the commercial property across town, the one I'd bought in 2008 for a fraction of its value, and had been leasing to a logistics company ever since. He didn't know about the investment account I'd opened quietly through a regional firm, which had grown considerably over the years, and which I had never discussed with anyone outside of Patricia and my accountant. And he didn't know that I'd had Patricia draft an updated power of attorney 18 months earlier, after the first heart scare, on her advice, specifically designed to prevent exactly what he was attempting. The document named my general manager and Patricia herself as co-trustees in the event of my incapacitation. Sutton's name appeared nowhere. What he thought he knew was that I was a tired old man with a modest business, some health problems, and a daughter who worried about him. What he actually knew was almost nothing. I did not call Wren that night. That was the hardest part. I wanted to. I picked up the phone twice. But Patricia had advised me clearly, don't tip your hand. Let it play out a little further. We needed to understand the full scope of what he'd attempted before we confronted anyone. So I waited. I went to dinner at their house the following Sunday. I ate pot roast and talked about football and watched Sutton across the table. Easy, relaxed, confident. He refilled my water glass and asked how I was feeling. I said I was feeling better every day. He had no idea that 2 days earlier, Patricia had sent a letter to the commercial broker formally withdrawing any representation Sutton had claimed and notifying the broker in writing that no transaction involving my properties could proceed without documentation from the trust. He had no idea that my bank had flagged and frozen an inquiry he'd made into my business line of credit. An inquiry he had made by calling the bank and identifying himself as the sting with family financial matters. He had no idea that Trent, my bookkeeper, had documented 3 separate requests Sutton had made for detailed financial records and had preserved every email. That Sunday dinner, I helped Wren with the dishes, and she asked if I was okay. She could tell something was in the air, I think, even if she couldn't name it. I told her I was fine. I told her the heart stuff was manageable, and I wasn't as tired as I'd been. I told her that I'd raised her right. I almost said it. I swallowed it. I love you, I said instead. She hugged me. I held on a little longer than usual. 2 weeks later, Patricia sent a formal letter to Sutton. It laid out, clearly and without hostility, what had been discovered, the letter of intent to the broker, the bank inquiry, the request to my bookkeeper. It stated that these actions constituted an unauthorized attempt to access and potentially liquidate assets held in trust, and that the matter was being preserved for legal review. It invited him to respond through his own legal counsel within 10 business days. He didn't respond. His lawyer did. The lawyer's letter was full of language about misunderstandings and concern for a family member's well-being, and no intent to act outside appropriate channels. It was a retreat dressed up as a clarification. Patricia called me after she read it. He knows he's exposed, she said. What do I do? I asked, though I already had a sense of the answer. That depends on what you want, she said. Legally, you have grounds to pursue him. The bank inquiry alone is a potential issue, but it depends on what outcome you're looking for. I thought about Wren. I thought about what it would mean to drag this into court, to make it a legal matter of record, to have my daughter standing in the middle of something she didn't start and couldn't stop. I want him to understand what he almost did, I said, and I want Wren to see it. Patricia understood. She scheduled a meeting. We held it on a Thursday afternoon at Patricia's office downtown. Wren and Sutton arrived together. Wren looked confused. Sutton looked composed in the careful way people do when they're managing their expression. My general manager sat beside me. Patricia sat at the head of the table. Patricia does not raise her voice. She's been practicing law for 28 years, and she has the kind of calm that comes from having sat in difficult rooms for a long time. She laid out the documents on the table, one at a time. The letter of intent, the bank transcript, the emails to Trent. Each one she set down quietly, like she was dealing cards. Sutton looked at the first document and said it had been a misunderstanding. Patricia said, "Let's look at the second one." He looked at the second document and said he'd only been trying to help. Patricia said, "Let's look at the third one." By the time she reached the fourth document, he had stopped explaining. Wren had stopped looking at Patricia. She was looking at her husband. Then Patricia did the thing I had asked her to do. She opened a folder and placed a single page in front of them, a summary of assets, the warehouse, the commercial property, the investment account, the full picture of what Whitfield Supply was actually worth. Numbers Wren had never seen, numbers Sutton had been fishing for without knowing how large the pond actually was. The room was quiet for a long time. Sutton said finally, "I didn't know about any of this." "I know," I said. "That's the point." Reen turned to me. Her eyes were wet. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at my daughter. I thought about how to say it in a way she'd understand. "Because I wanted you to love me for me," I said. "Not for what I was going to leave you. And because I needed to know what the people around you were made of." She didn't say anything. She looked back at her husband. Sutton tried once more to say that he'd only been acting out of concern, that he'd never intended to do anything improper, that if it had looked bad, he was sorry for the perception. I let him finish. Then I said, "Son, there's a difference between concern and control. You were trying to get your hands on something that wasn't yours before I was done with it. I understand why, but I need you to understand what that tells me about you." He didn't respond. Patricia outlined the legal exposure clearly. She also made clear that I had chosen not to pursue formal action at this time, and that this meeting was the record I was choosing to create instead. Sutton's lawyer received a copy of everything. It would sit in a file. If anything like this occurred again, the file would grow. Sutton nodded. He looked smaller than he had at Sunday dinner. Walking out of Patricia's office that afternoon, Wren took my arm. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the October light. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, Dad." I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her she wasn't her husband's choices. She told me quietly that she had been uncomfortable for months, that things between her and Sutton had been harder than she'd let on, that she'd suspected something was off but hadn't known what to look for. She said she'd thought his interest in my finances was just him being controlling in the way he was sometimes controlling about things, and she'd been trying to manage it. I listened. I didn't tell her what to do. That's not my job. What I did tell her was this. I told her about the trust and how it worked and who was named in it. I told her she would be taken care of, not because she needed to know the number, but because she needed to know she was protected. I told her that nothing he had tried would have worked, even if Reeves had played along. That the structure was solid, that Patricia had seen to that. She cried a little on the sidewalk. I put my arm around her. "You planned for this," she said. "I planned for every version of this," I said. "That's what fathers do." Here's the part that matters, the part I want anyone who watches this to hear. I didn't win because I was angry. I didn't win because I moved fast or yelled or made threats. I won because I had been quietly, carefully, unhurriedly building something for 3 decades, and I had protected it with the same patience. When you spend your life working in a way that looks ordinary from the outside, there's a risk that people confuse your humility with your limit. They see the pickup truck and the packed lunch and the worn jacket, and they decide they understand you. They decide you're the ceiling when you're actually the foundation. Sutton made that mistake. A lot of people make that mistake. My heart is still not perfect. I still take my medication and go to my appointments and let my general manager handle more than I probably should. But the business is running. The properties are secure. Patricia checks in every few months. And Wren is figuring out her life. She and Sutton are in counseling. I don't know where it goes. That's not my story to tell. But she calls me every Sunday now, without fail. We talk about small things. Her week, my week. Sometimes we talk about her mother. Sometimes I make her laugh. Last month, she came over and we had coffee at my kitchen table. The same table where I sat with that cold cup the morning I got Reeves' call. And she looked around the house like she was seeing it fresh. "I never really understood what you built," she said. "Most people don't," I said. "That's all right." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I do now." That's the right question to end on. Not how much it was worth. Not what it says about Sutton, or about trust, or about any of the legal mechanics that Patricia handled so well. The right question is, what does it mean when the people closest to you finally see you clearly? I've been asking myself that my whole life. I think I'd finally have an answer. It means you did the work. It means you built something real, and it means you were patient enough to let the truth do what the truth does. When you give it enough time and enough room. You don't have to threaten anyone. You don't have to raise your voice. You just have to have built something they couldn't take.